Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm really excited for the information that's going to be shared this morning. My name is Jennifer Kutcher. I am currently acting general manager for the BC Grain Producers. My background is in ag retail and agronomy and environmental consulting. So this is right up my alley. So I'm really excited for this. For those of you who don't know the BC Grain Producers, our association is comprised of grain and oilseed producers from across British Columbia, with the majority of them residing in the BC Peace region. There's about 250 producers in our membership, which spans over 350,000 acres. The BC Peace region is a very unique growing area in comparison to the rest of the province. We face different challenges that are separate from the remainder of the province, such as northern climate, rural population, and transportation challenges. As you can see on the screen right here, our vision statement, which I like to think is what is our goal for the association. And it's that grain producers in BC are profitable, sustainable, and recognized as providers of safe, high quality food. And what we do, our mission statement, is that we support and we connect grain producers in BC by providing a collective voice, information, and regionally relevant research. The BC Grain Producers is part of the Peace Region Living Labs project, which is a cross-border, cross-commodity project that features different testing of best management practices across the whole BC and Alberta Peace region. BC Grain Producers has currently 7 sites in the project. We're working with different grain and oilseed producers on these sites, and we're monitoring these sites over the duration of the 5-year project. These best management practices include different tillage practices, so comparing plowing versus minimum till. We're comparing cover cropping versus annual cropping. There's also fact sheets and webinars that are going on throughout the duration of this project, which is really important to the knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer. And here's why we are here today. One of the topics that kept coming up throughout our field tours and field visits this summer was soil pH and the low soil pH that we have in the BC Peace region. And Norm Dueck's name kept coming up throughout the duration of these visits. And so I actually had the opportunity to meet Norm at a Living Labs project function in Fairview this summer. And so when I got talking to Norm, I was like, we need to get him on to present at a webinar or one of BC Grain's events. So I'm really excited that Norm is able to come here and present today, and it's a topic that I think a lot of producers will get a lot of really valuable information, and there'll also be an opportunity at the end of the webinar for you guys to ask any questions of Norm. So Norm, do you want me to do your introduction, or can you introduce yourself?
You go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so Norm sent me this really nice biography of him, and I was really interested, and it made me want to ask some more questions. But Norm was born in Belize to a Mennonite family on a mixed farm. At age 7, his family moved to Costa Rica and continued mixed farming with the focus of dairy, poultry, and layers. In 1984, he moved to Manitoba. His family was small-scale agriculture, but then his dad and his father started a fabricating business and now employ about 150 people in Manitoba and South Dakota. Norm opted, however, to move to BC in 1999 with his wife to work in the ag retail industry as a crop advisor for an independent retailer in Vanderhoof. He has 3 children, all born in Vanderhoof, who are either in college or have gone to start their adult life. Norm has a vast experience and knowledge in soil nutrition, health, and many prairie crops, including cereals, canola, forages, corn, etc. He also has worked with wood ash, biosolids, and pulp sludge in order to help growers achieve success, whether it be dairy farming, beef, row cropping, or a mix of all. In May of 2023, he achieved his LL Ag certificate with the BC Institute of Agrologists. On top of that, Norm has taken time away from work and takes high school students on field trips or agronomy events to encourage young people to pursue a career in agriculture or simply motivate them to continue their involvement in the family farm. His approach to agronomy is one of balance. If your soil nutrients are in proper balance to each other and you need to feed your crop a balanced ration, your crop will show it and you will love it. Norm's passion for agriculture is infectious, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. So take it away, Norm.
Thank you. Thank everybody else for showing up on this event. I'm proud to be a part of it. I've done a few in-person sessions in the last couple of weeks, and so this is the first online I've been doing. But it's a great way to, I guess, not have to travel in the winter as much. So yeah, thanks for the intro, and we'll yeah. I'd look for questions if you guys have any questions anytime. I prefer to have an interactive session rather than me just talking the whole time. So if you have a way, if there's any questions and you want to interrupt me, please do. And keep it interesting that way. So can you guys hear me okay? Just to make sure.
Coming through nice and clear, Norm.
All right. I'm gonna share my screen here. Make sure I get the right one. So yeah, so what I do, I guess my role in the BC and Alberta piece has been twofold. One is as a crop specialist, prairie soil and crop specialist with A&L Labs. I started using their services in about 2010, 2011, namely because I was getting a lot of questions from producers that were along the lines of, Norm, we've been doing this for the last 10, 20 years, and we're not getting the same results anymore. The general advice by a lot of folks in the industry would be, well, then you have to put more on. That's what we call the moron principle. If it doesn't grow, you put more on. In some cases, it does work. It's not always the best answer to go to, or the best the best way of approaching issues in your field. So anyway, that got me digging deeper into what might be some of the issues that our growers are facing. And in Vanderhoof, when I came here in '99, the average soil pH was around, I'd say an average of probably 6.4 to 6.8, 6.9, somewhere in there. Some just over 7. In almost 25 years, we've dropped down a full pH point down to not a point, a full place down to mid-5s, and I still have some in the mid-6s, but the average is probably closer to 5.8 to 6.1, 6.2 right now. So it's been a steady decrease, and that is typical. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It happens in any farming setting. It's not just to do with farming. There are numerous reasons why that can happen. So anyway, that got me on the lookout for what we might do to at least stop the bleeding and put ourselves in a better position to continue growing the crops that we are used to growing, or better yet, let's grow better crops. So that's my one hat. The other hat is I work as an independent consultant. I have some acres that I take care of up in the BC piece in the Dawson Creek, Fort St. John area. I work with a few growers up there directly, and I work indirectly with growers through some of the retails up there as well on the A&L side. So I have about 3 or 4 years in the BC piece. I've been there doing some fairly intensive work with some growers. Before that, it was more just driving through, talking to retails and some independent consultants. So it's been a pleasure working with the folks up in that region, as well as down here in the central part of the province. I'll just go through some of this here. Obviously, some of you know Vanderhoof area, some do not. We're just east of it, or just west of Prince George. We have a little valley called the Nechako Valley. It's only, I think the whole valley is probably about 150,000 acres of arable land. So very small in comparison to what you guys have up there. The BC and Alberta piece combined is about 9 million acres. It's not all arable necessarily, but it's 9 million agricultural listed acres from what I can tell. As an independent consultant, I do roughly 40,000 acres between the two areas that I work in. So some of the discussions we've been having and are still very much at the forefront is that soil test nutrient levels are in fact dropping across Western Canada. Probably most of North America, nutrients are dropping. There's some exceptions. The lower mainland, they keep having issues with too much phosphate on hand, so those phosphate numbers are not necessarily dropping there, but they're very concentrated. But overall, we're dropping in phosphate and potassium numbers because we're removing crops and not always putting back what we take out. Rising costs of inputs, it's the forefront of most people's minds when they're thinking fertility. Environmental pressures, of course, are big as well, with the government putting forth reduced emissions or emission reduction. I look at that and say, bring it on, partly because what the government is pushing in emissions reductions via maybe reduced nitrogen application is maybe uninformed, but it's not all wrong. We can grow better crops, bigger crops with less nitrogen, given that we would take care of the other nutrients. So that's some of the focus today. We're going to talk about soil pH, calcium levels, and so on, which plays a huge role in the production of crops. Sometimes it seems like experts, so so-called experts in the industry, are in dark ages. Speaking of the government, not everything is as easy as it is maybe put out to be. City people often don't get it, so we have that culture to work with. Often we don't get it, I think, and what we could be doing better and how we could improve on what we are doing. So first of all, acknowledgements. I steal slides from anybody and everybody who I cross paths with. So there's a whole list of people here I've probably robbed something from. They are all aware of it. So there's no issues there. I just want to be upfront with that. Not all this stuff is mine. It's a lot of stuff put together from colleagues and people I look up to. So soil pH is the topic of the day, and it is a big one. So let's just start working through that. If there are questions, like I said, if you find a way, Kaylee, to interrupt me, or just please pipe in if there's something you need to have addressed.
Not a problem.
All right. So this is a screenshot I think many of you have seen in the past, the pH effect on nutrient availability. So basically, you see the blue line. Can you guys see my cursor, by the way, moving back and forth?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. All right, good to know. So you see the blue line. Kind of the sweet spot is between, I would say, between 6.2 and 6.8 is mostly the sweet spot of where you want to be in pH. So in some cases, if you get below 6, nitrogen is less available. You get over 8, again, same thing happens. Some micronutrients are more available in low pH than others, manganese being a big one. And one of the things I'll mention, that up in the Peace region, I have seen the majority of soils up there are not just low in manganese, they're deficient and extremely deficient in manganese. You guys are getting away with it because we have a low pH and the manganese that is there is readily available. Nitrogen increases plant nutrient uptake. So this is another interesting one. When we add nitrogen to the soil, it increases the uptake of other nutrients as well. No nitrogen added versus 160 pounds per acre, and you see the difference in potassium uptake, for example, or like all the nutrients go up in uptake. So when we apply nitrogen, we need to consider what else we are removing from the soil at a faster pace. So poor fertility requires more nitrogen for crop response, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing poor fertility in many areas up there, and we're having harder time growing the same crops as we did in the past. The fertilizer efficiency thing is another one where pH plays a huge role. If you're looking at a pH of 5, roughly wasting close to half of the fertilizer that's put out there on NPK. If we get the pH up to 6, now we're only wasting 20%. If we get a pH of 7, we're at the most efficient. Now you got that 8-cylinder engine running on all 8 when we have a proper pH in the soil, or neutral pH. So when you look at that, it's always hard to pin I guess an ROI on lime, because it's a slow investment. The investment comes back slowly. But when you look at these numbers here, it needs to be looked at. So just some interesting facts on classification of soils. Very coarse soil, 90,000 or 90 particles per gram, up to a clay soil, 90, is that million? No, that's 90 billion particles of soil per gram of weight-wise. So huge difference in that, and huge difference in the surface area. Now the surface area comes in here because the finer your soil is, the more nutrients it can hold, but the more calcium or lime it will take to move that pH up and down, or to move it up. So what is the soil, or what is soil pH, and how does it influence crop performance? So why does soil pH change? Does it change with topsoil depth? Yes, it does somewhat. What does the pH scale really identify, and what is the range for optimum crop production? These are some of the areas we're going to cover in the next 45 minutes or so. How does fertilizer influence pH? What will the initial negative field observation be, and in what crop will this most likely show up? Lime requirements are not just determined by soil pH. Just keep that in mind. We're going to cover some of that as we go through. So soil pH generally refers to the degree of soil acidity and or alkalinity. I'm not going to read this whole thing. It's basically potential, or the pH is potential hydrogen in the soil, and if you have too much hydrogen in the soil, it plays a role in where your pH is going to be. So as an interesting point here, just what acidic versus alkaline looks like in some familiar things that we work with. Lemon juice is obviously very acidic, and you go to milk, magnesia, it's on the alkaline side. Factors affecting soil pH, parent material of the soil. When you have the parent material that is high in calcium, you're going to have a lot slower reduction in pH because it can keep drawing from a little further down. Rainfall affects it, H2O, speaking of hydrogen. Leaching out of nutrients such as calcium, magnesium. So calcium, magnesium are the two main elements that elevate your pH in the soil. So lots of rainfall will leach them out slowly over time. Plants growing during soil formation is another thing. Plants give off hydrogen. We'll probably touch on that a little bit later. Type of crops grown makes a big difference. Some crops draw way more calcium and magnesium out of the soil than other crops do. For instance, pine trees versus grassland. Pines are known for their acidic addition to the soil. So rainfall, H2O, when it combines with carbon dioxide, it forms a weak acid, and then as the rain or the weak acid releases hydrogen and bicarbonate. So the released hydrogen replaces the calcium ions held on the soil, and then it becomes more acidic when you have more hydrogen and less calcium on the soil particle as it's being leached through. So you start with an equal number of calcium and hydrogen ions on the clay surface, plus an equal number competing for a place on the clay surface. So this brown square here would be your soil particle, and you have a certain amount of hydrogen and calcium ions that are in and around or attached to this clay particle. And as that changes, you have, let's say you have lots of hydrogen in there, which reduces pH. And so what you can do here is you can add calcium to the soil in the form of lime, which then bumps the hydrogen off the soil particle, creating a higher pH soil by replacing hydrogen with calcium. That's the very basic analogy of what liming does to a soil. So in the soil solution, we have all these elements that most are nutrients, some are not. Some are like hydrogen is not really a soil nutrient, but we need some of it in the soil. So you have some that are stronger than others, that have a positive charge. So soil particles have a negative charge. Some nutrients have a positive charge, some have a negative charge. For example, nitrogen has a negative charge, most forms of nitrogen, so it does not attach to the soil very well. Calcium, for one, has a positive charge. Magnesium is positive. Potassium is positive. Hydrogen is. So these are all fighting for a spot at the table, so to speak. And when you have now calcium, I think is so they're +2 or +3. I always get those mixed up. But you have a stronger attachment to the soil, meaning if you introduce calcium to the soil, being stronger than magnesium, it can bump magnesium off. Now, potassium is only a +1, but it's a larger molecule, so it has more or a stronger ability to attach to the soil than, let's say, magnesium does as well. So you can, when you understand how that works, you know that when you introduce potassium to the soil, it will tend to bump magnesium off if there is too much magnesium, and hydrogen gets bumped off as well fairly readily using lime or other of the cations that are in the mix here. So NH4 is a positive, but for the most part, nitrogen, sulfur does not adhere to stick to the soil either. So in the solution, Obviously, the idea is you want to get from the soil particle into the root, to the root hair, for proper crop growth. There's an exchange happening in the soil that is quite complicated, but when you understand the basics of it, you can really make a difference on how your crop can perform. Fertilizer effect. Yes, a lot of fertilizers have a negative impact on soil pH. For example, you put down well, this is a nitrate fertilizer. They have an example here, or a nitrate, potassium nitrate, I believe. So it has hydrogen in it as well. It goes into the soil. Some of the nitrates can leach off. Some of it gets taken up by the crop. You can apply ammonium type of fertilizer that has hydrogen as well. So in the cycle, you end up, the plants will take, let's say, the nitrogen for their own growth, or some of it leaches off, but the hydrogen ends up staying in the soil. So that can impact soil pH. So it's important to know what products are the best for your particular soil. There are some cases where we want to reduce pH, so then fertilizer can actually help with that. But in most cases, up in the BCP specifically, you want to go the other way. We have a low pH, and we'd like to at least stop that and see if we can start going the other direction. So for each pound of nitrogen as ammonia, it takes approximately 1.8 pounds of pure calcium carbonate to neutralize the residual acidity. So a pound of nitrogen has a negative impact on the acidity of the soil, and it takes almost 2 times that amount of calcium to just negate that negative impact. So it takes a lot of, and we've been doing this for decades. We have a big challenge ahead of us to try and turn the ship around. We have a lot of low pHs. Of course, the impact of low pH affects, how diseases thrive as well, among many other factors. When plants grow, the exchange in the soil from the root exodus to, there's hydrogen coming off as well. Roots die off, and the hydrogen ions are released from the plant roots. And it is part of the process where they need to do that to absorb the nutrients that's required for growth. But in the process, again, there's an acidifying effect of the soil. Different crops removing different amounts of calcium and magnesium. And namely, we're talking about calcium and magnesium here because those are the two elements that will hold your pH up better than any other nutrients. So alfalfa, for example, now 8-ton, I know it's a bit of a stretch for our country. I'd be happy with a 4-ton crop. But an 8-ton crop removes 224 pounds of actual calcium out of the soil every year, and 40 pounds of magnesium. Wheat, obviously a lot less, at only 20 pounds, an 80 bushel wheat crop. Canola, even less than that. So different crops remove different amounts of calcium from the soil. So an alfalfa crop is very hungry. It's a little harder to keep up on the liming side. And alfalfa is also more sensitive to low pH than these other crops are. So it's even more important to make sure we replace what we're pulling out. So subsoil acidity is obviously another one that affects the pH of the soil. If it's extremely low or very acidic, then especially if your subsoil is very acidic, you should be applying lime in the fall the year before, so that it can, and then turn it in as deeply as possible. Now that's a bit of a I can get shot down for saying that, because we don't like tillage in the prairies for sure, in the more open spaces. In central BC, we do a fair bit of tillage. We don't have the issue of wind erosion here. Of course, we do have the opportunity for water erosion to happen. But when you really want to change your soil acidity, you have to work it down deeper. I always say 6 inches is the minimum to actually make that change. It's going to last so long. You could just do it in the top couple inches, I suppose, and have a shorter response time, a shorter result, shorter lasting effect of the lime if you just go in the top couple inches. So this is just a random soil test to show the difference in the soil depth. So we have a 3-inch depth, 3 to 6, and 6 to 12, and the pH does change It goes higher or lower in this case, partly because the magnesium is so high in the lower parts of the soil. So we have a falsely elevated pH down there because magnesium is as high as it is. So many crops grow best at pH close to neutral, which we know. There are a few crops that prefer acidic soils, and off the top of my head, I'd say, blueberries would be one of those that they're always trying to get a lower pH environment to do better. But on average, you need a pH between 6, 7 for the crop for most crops to perform better. On the microbial side, microbial activity slows down drastically when you get below 6.2 pH. And we've done that research at A&L Labs that clearly shows that once you get to, like I said, below 6.2 pH, your microbial activity takes a big hit, among other negative impacts of being at that range. Okay, so relative yield based on some of these crops here. Well, let's go back to that. We don't do corn up there, I think, for the most part, but wheat, pH of 4.7. Now, these are not necessarily bushels per acre. These are just a relative, 100 being ideal. An ideal number here. So wheat, get a low pH. It's over 30% difference in yield between ideal pH and the lower pH. I'm not sure why barley has a 0 here. Maybe it can't perform at that lower pH at all. I know barley is more sensitive to some of these conditions that wheat would be. So overall, that 6.8 pH is, if you want to hit one target, that's going to be it. That 6.8 pH for most crops will be the best you can do. Now, alfalfa does fine at higher pHs. Barley does too, oats as well. Most crops do okay up to 7.5. Once you start hitting 8 pH, then it can really start negatively impacting a number of crops, because now you're dealing with nutrients being tied up at certain pHs, including phosphate and boron, for example. Root growth and soil pH. Not sure whose study this is. I guess this is a 1957 study. They went from pH from about 4.5, 25% root growth. You hit that 7% or 7 pH again, you have 85% root growth. So huge difference in root growth when you have a proper pH in your soil. And root growth is all about nutrient uptake. And if you have roots that are inhibited by different factors, pH being one of them, you can see that you're going to have a hard time growing as good a crop, because it doesn't have the means to pull in nutrients like a crop in a neutral pH would have. And this is really what it's all about. This picture is one of Mike Dolinsky's, and many of you guys probably know Mike Dolinsky. He's one of my favorite presenters. Not only is he entertaining, he's also a professional photographer. And so this is what it's about. The root hair, obviously, this is where your nutrients come in. Here too, if you have a low pH soil or high aluminum soil, you're going to have a browning, kind of like a coffee stain on the root tip. That means it's suffering from adverse conditions, and of course the lateral roots. And that's the one thing that I've learned from A&L research, is that when you hit manganese levels, as I mentioned earlier, when your manganese levels drop below 8 parts per million, I believe it is, lateral root growth stops. So that is one of my biggest concerns up in your area next to Lyme, maybe, is we have such low manganese levels that we're having trouble with lateral roots being or performing at their optimum. So here's a study done on subsoil acidity and how it affects root growth. So this is the top layer here is I believe, all the next slide I think shows, well, the subsoil here is 6.5 pH versus 5.2 versus 5.5. And the root growth shows substantial differences. We got good root growth here, very limited on the middle one, and also limited on the one on the right hand side, based on acidic soil, subsoil. So root tip damage by acid soil are swollen and twisted often in appearance, and it's typically microscopic type work that you need to do to be able to tell this really well. Available calcium must be present in all areas of the soil where the roots where root growth will take place. So it cannot be absorbed in the surface soil and translocate to the roots. So if you have an acidic parent material down below or subsoil, and you lime the top 6 inches, that's great. And most of your root growth happens in the top 6 inches, but it's still going to be limiting factors to how deep those roots can go. Now, and I'm talking mostly the roots that take up your nutrients, the water looking or water seeking roots they're usually the bigger ones, so not as limited, but the root hair will have a harder time in the acidic subsoil. So pH and soil calcium. This is just some site-specific sampling done. I think this is Ontario data that the lab did, where they're looking for pH levels in different fields and how it varies through the course of any given field, and it's very interesting to see how much it can vary. Percent calcium is the bottom one here. This is the pH map versus percent calcium, and here we have calcium parts per million versus yeah, they're actually both that way. So huge differences, and I've seen the same thing in my field as well. Big differences in that, and this is a lime recommendation based on those maps. So only you can see up to 13,000 pounds in the red areas required of lime, down to 0 on the white, obviously, and just a little bit, anywhere from 50 pounds to 4,000 pounds in the green to yellow areas, based on not just pH in the soil or calcium, but other factors that would indicate or that would help calcium be available. So aluminum would be one of them. And just another random sample here showing the difference in some of the pHs, as it varies throughout the season. So we tend to focus more on, when it comes to liming, I mean, we used to focus a lot on soil pH, but the buffer pH has to be considered because buffer pH is a more consistent number. Your soil pH can vary throughout the season from spring to fall quite readily. So the pH is becoming less and less of a deciding factor on how much lime a crop would need. We're focusing more on calcium and the base saturation of calcium. So soil pH is a measurement of hydrogen in the soil solution. Buffer pH is a measure of hydrogen on the soil particle. So in the soil solution changes, there's flow going on back and forth. And that's why the pH in the soil solution changes more so than the buffer pH, because it's an indication of hydrogen on the soil particle. So again, it measures hydrogen ion activity, and it's expressed in logarithmic terms. It indicates acidity of the soil solution, active acidity, whereas buffer pH is active and reserve acidity of the soil. So low CEC or soil CEC has an impact as well, obviously, on what the soil can hold. So a low CEC is a coarser soil, so it can hold on to less nutrients, whereas a high CEC tends to be a finer textured soil, has much more capacity to hold, the calcium, the magnesium, all the ion, the cations, which tend to increase soil pH. So percent calcium and buffer pH are more, they're more indicator of calcium needs rather than pH. One thing to note is if calcium raises, or lime raises your pH by 1 point, magnesium raises that by 1.5 points. So you can have a low calcium, high magnesium soil that actually shows a decent pH, but it is being, I would say, falsely held up by the excess magnesium in the soil. So what happens at times is when you have a high mag soil and you introduce lime to it, you can see your pH drop the first year, because the calcium, being a stronger element or a bigger element or molecule than magnesium, will bump magnesium off the soil particle, thereby at first reducing pH, and then over the course of a year or two, it finds its equilibrium, and slowly it brings the pH up to where it needs to be based on the calcium rather than on the magnesium. And there are some pockets up in the piece that are very high magnesium. For the most part, they're not crazy high, but there's definitely some areas where there's high mag soils, and that causes a whole bunch of other issues as well. So when you have high magnesium soil, it obviously reduces calcium availability and tightens up your soil. So if you're walking through your field in the summer and when it's raining, and every step you take, you gain an inch of height, a good indication of high mag soils. It gets sticky and tight and water doesn't permeate. It just sits on top, and then it forms a crust. And when you're planting a new seeding, or let's say you're planting a crop and then you get a hard rain before the crop is out of the ground, that can cause all kinds of issues with plants starting to look like accordions under the soil because they can't push through that crust. So magnesium plays a big role in that, and sodium does as well, but at a different, slightly different angle. So this soil here, for example, has extremely high magnesium, and the calcium is hardly any different from between the two. But if you look at the pH, we're 7 to 7.9. So it's this magnesium number here that is giving you that high pH in that soil. Anything over 20 on the magnesium percent magnesium is a problem. There is lots of information regarding the fact that when you have a magnesium percent base saturation of over 20%, you can actually have a magnesium deficient plant growing in a high mag soil because it can't take up the magnesium that's there. It's not clicking here. There we go. Okay, just pointing that out. High magnesium. K to mag ratio is another very important factor in crop performance, and that is essentially it is percent K divided by magnesium, and you want this number to be between 0.25 and 0.35. So when you have high magnesium, one indication is that you'll get a response to the addition of potassium because this number is out of balance. And I've seen fields where you walk into an area where through variable rate, I guess, analysis of the soil or digital mapping of the field, you can tell what your let's say your K to mag ratio is in various parts of the field. And I've walked into a field where corn is 4 feet tall, and then you walk into an area right beside it where the magnesium or the K to magnesium ratio is ideal, and the corn is twice the height. So it's one of the key factors related directly to yield is the K to mag ratio, and we don't pay enough attention to it. And here again, CEC, this is a finer soil, holds on to more nutrients. There's a higher CEC. There's the pH, soil pH, and phosphorus availability. So this is another factor that we need to consider because we rely heavily on that starter phosphate to get that crop out of the ground in our cold northern climates. When your soil temperature is below, I think it's 12 or 13 degrees, you have a very limited availability of phosphate. And as far as I can tell, and from experience, we plant most of our soils in soil temperatures that are colder than that, and often probably around 4 or 5 degrees. Especially crops like peas, we'll plant them just about into frozen ground. And so it's very important that somehow you are able to provide that crop early on with phosphate, whether it's seed placed, or it should be seed placed, some of it, or whether it's granular seed placed, or I've seen really good results with a liquid phos starter right on the seed, like dribbled onto the seed, can really help that crop get out of the ground. Because in a week in the beginning of the season can translate into a 2-week advantage at the end of the season if you have that crop come out a week earlier. So optimum ranges for legumes. Now you guys don't grow, well, there's areas actually where you grow decent alfalfa, but there's not a whole lot of alfalfa up there. However, and partly of that, a big reason for that is probably because we don't have a pH to support it anymore. So the ideal, alfalfa likes that. Like I said, anything 6.2 and over is where you get to be in the sweet spot. But between 6.2 and about 6.8 or 7 is really where you want to be. Alfalfa, clovers would be very similar. Little, they can tolerate a little bit more, but it's around that 6, 8, 7 as well. Soybeans, and again, which you don't grow up there, has a wider range of where it can do well. Herbicide residue is another big concern that's directly related to low pH or low calcium soils. I know there's some products you guys don't use up there that we use here because of of the residual. It's not just a pH, but it plays a big role. But also, if you have drier conditions and a low pH, some herbicides do not break down fast enough, and you can have issues the following year or two with residuals. And so this is the one thing to keep in mind, that if you are going to lime your soil, You need to have a record, a history of what herbicides you have been using in the past few years, because you bring your pH from, let's say, from 5 to 6, you may start seeing negative impact of residual herbicide that you would have never considered to be an issue. So that's the very, very important. I can't stress it enough. If you're going to lime your fields, you need to know what herbicides have been used in the last number of years, and then plan your crop rotation accordingly, as those herbicides slowly degrade in the soil after a lime application. So please be careful when you're considering that. It can take your crop out if you're not aware of it. So, like I said before, pH should not be the only factor to figure out how much lime to apply. I use base saturation of calcium, and obviously CEC and a few other factors that will determine your biggest factors should be base saturation of calcium and CEC, and of course what kind of crop you want to grow, or what your target crop is as far as deciding calcium needs. Again, lime recommendations, don't make them just on a water pH test, because the pH can fluctuate throughout the season. So if you test your soil in the spring, you might have a pH of 5.5. You test the fall, you might have a pH of 5.8. So not a good idea to just use pH as your recommendation making tool. You could end up over applying lime, or you might end up not applying enough, and then now the grower has to go back in the field again. And applying lime is not an easy task, and one of the biggest reasons we don't do it is because most people don't have the equipment. So when you do it, you want to do it right. You want to do it well, so you don't have to do it again the next year. Because typically, you can, with one lime application, you can that can take care of a number of years of not having to do it again, depending, of course, how heavy you're going on it. Calcitic versus dolomitic lime. There's a few places here, I know, in the Prince George area, where I would love to get my hands on some dolomitic lime because it comes with magnesium. So if you have a soil that's already low in magnesium, then dolomitic lime is the way to go. But in most cases up there, calcitic lime will be the product of choice because you have good magnesium levels. So the reason that is because when you apply lime to a soil, it, like I said earlier, it tends to bump the weaker buddy off the soil, so to speak. So if you already have low magnesium and then you add some lime, that lime is going to quite likely lower the already low magnesium levels in that soil. Or potassium can be the same thing. So when you're adding lime to a soil, you need to be aware of where your other nutrients are at, and be aware that you may have to add some of the other ones in order to keep them in line with where they need to be for proper crop performance. Again, that calcium raises pH, magnesium does it faster. Gone over that before. So let's say if your soil is low magnesium, like I said, I've got one farm here in Prince George area that is magnesium is around 7, or as low as 4%, but probably averages around 7 or 8% magnesium. And just to apply, and they're actually applying wood ash on that farm this coming summer. So I've already prepared the manager to make sure that he has magnesium on hand that he can apply to the soil, because we do not want to get left short on that front, because then all of a sudden it seems like liming isn't working. And sometimes, guys, you finally get somebody to apply lime, but you don't look at the whole picture, and they end up not getting the response they thought they should, or they ended up getting a negative response from the lime application, very likely because they didn't look after some of the other nutrients that are directly impacted by the application of lime. Anyway, so if magnesium is approaching 20%, then you definitely want to use calcitic lime. Basically, I tend to target 70% base saturation of calcium. 65 to 75% is the ideal range when doing variable rate, when using variable rate technology. So there's a caution. There's a maximum amount of lime you should be putting down any given time. So I have a grower. I'm going to show some maps later, some variability in soil there. But based on your CEC, if your CEC is greater than 17, which I think a lot of soils I see up there are between that 13 to 17. So the maximum amount of application of lime you want to do per year in a case like that would be 3.5 ton, because you can shock the soil by putting too much down. If you have a lower CEC, then you got to be more careful. So it takes well, the advantage is that it takes less product to move the pH in a lower CEC as well, so you need less product. But I have one of the guys just east of Dawson who his calcium is so low that he would need an average of 8 ton to the acre of lime. In some cases would be higher, in some places would be higher than that. So you can't do that in 1 year. You can, but you might end up with a negative impact over the course of a number of years. It would still work out in the end, but you may end up shocking the crop, throwing some other nutrients out of balance. So there's a maximum amount that you want to put down, or you shouldn't go over by too much. And that's at a 6-inch or 6 3/4 inch depth. So if you're going deeper, then you could do more based on the amount of soil that you're trying to change. The other thing too we need to look at is once you achieve the desired pH, let's say your target is 6.5, you achieve it. Now, rather than going back through the old cycle of in 10 years being back to a 5.5 pH or a 5 pH, we need to look at maintaining that. And there's different ways of doing that. There are pelletized limes out there that work really well for that. I'm doing that in my quarter section here. I'm picking certain areas that I know are low in calcium and throwing just a little bit of a pelletized lime down every year. I guess it spreads the cost, and pelletized lime you can spread with any kind of a spreader. You don't have to have special equipment, so it makes it easier to do. You just every year you throw some pelletized lime down to maintain the pH, or you can build it slowly. I have a client east of Vanderhoof or west of Vanderhoof who has been doing around 200 to 220 pounds of pelletized lime every year under his irrigated pivots for the last 10 years roughly. And might have missed a year here and there, but mostly it's been every single year 200 to 250 pounds of pelletized lime. And we've brought his base saturation of calcium from mid 40s to mid 60s in 10 years. And his crop production curve is the exact same. It goes up every year by improving the soil calcium levels. So you can maintain it with small amounts every year based on crop removal. So you need lime if you have high aluminum soils, and in most cases we do. We have high aluminum soils, and we have some toxicity issues with lime, and so lime is another way of reducing, or is it a good way to reduce toxicity of aluminum to your crops? When you have high aluminum soils, you end up having burnt root tips is one of the side effects, and I think I've got a picture in here somewhere later that shows you what a burnt root tip looks like. So crop sensitivity to aluminum, alfalfa is wheat, barley, highly sensitive. Not as sensitive would be some crops like canola, clover. Peas are not as sensitive. Tolerant, ryegrass and rye. Potatoes, highly tolerant would be oats. And this is why you guys grow some really good oat crops up in the Peace region. I've seen some amazing crops up there, and partly because that crop tolerates aluminum toxicity very well. Here's a picture of a aluminum a root looks like with aluminum toxicity. It's supposed to, this is a microscopic picture, obviously, this is a root hair. It's supposed to look pointed. This is what it looks like in high aluminum, just burnt, scorched the tip of it. So when you realize that this root has to penetrate the soil, it's like driving a nail into a hardwood with either a point or a blunt end. It doesn't work very well. A&L Labs has been working on some trials with clubroot, and I know clubroot is creeping into the piece for sure in the Alberta piece. There's been some spotted. We've been working on a product to try and reduce the effect or the chance of contracting clubroot. But mostly, if you are the sweet spot for clubroot or for not having clubroot in your canola is a base saturation percent of calcium of 72 or higher. Now that's high because most of your soils are probably 30%, 40% if you're lucky. So it takes a lot of investment to move the needle to 70 percent, 72%. But that's been the sweet spot when you have your base saturation of calcium at that level. Clubroot it really becomes a non-issue for the most part. So we did some trials based on. I'm going to flip between here a little bit. So T1 obviously has got lots of clubroot. You get to let's say T5, T4, T5. Yeah, better root system, less clubroot. Still some in there, and these were infected plants to begin with. So we've been working on some product. I'm not sure how or when that's going to hit the market. That would be probably a seed treatment. It's not A&L. It's not wouldn't be the one selling a product or marketing it. They'd find somebody they've been in the works to develop this product. Hopefully it comes to the market one of these times to help eliminate reduce the potential for clubroot. Some couple other trials here, infested soil versus treated soils, drastic difference. So in conclusion on this part of the soil pH, it's in almost all cases, it's the best investment you're going to make on your farm. It is the biggest limiting factor that most of us face in crop production. Now, the challenges are because it's a product that's hard to handle. There are some sources out there now. 5 years ago is maybe about when I started tooting the horn about guys need to start looking at liming. And in the last 5 years, very slow uptick. But now in the last year or two, all of a sudden we've got a couple of suppliers of lime in the area. There's guys bringing lime in. I know there's some. I think it's beet lime coming up from southern Alberta. There's a company in Grand Prairie that'll haul it and apply it for you. They have spreaders. There's a company out of BC that will haul it for you. You may have to spread it yourself. We hauled a bunch into the Dawson Creek area last fall. Did a 300 or 400 acres of application, probably about 1,000 to 1,200 ton. So it's becoming more available. There is a lime in Chetwynd or a lime mine in Chetwynd. Limestone Cowboys, they've done a good job of slowly getting their product to market. Not all limes are created equal, but I've used that one myself, and I've seen it work. It does an excellent job of increasing soil pH, and so there are options. They're getting closer. I wish we had more wood ash we could work with, but it's very limited. BC red tape is quite. It's hard to get by, or it takes a lot of work to get wood ash on your soils. If you ever have a chance at it, do whatever it takes to get it because it's worth it. I've worked a fair bit with those types of products. So basically, anyway, it's a good investment. Reducing weeds, insect disease pressure on many fronts where this has impact. So essentially, we are going to have to do it. We haven't looked at it for however long we farmed in the area, but at some point we're going to have to pay the piper, for lack of a better term. We've been taking calcium out of the soil year after year after year and not replacing it. And at some point, we're going to have to do it if we want to keep farming and growing decent crops. So now I'm going to go a little bit into lime quality, just some basics on that. How are we doing for time? It's 10 o'clock just about. Okay. Are we still okay?
Yeah, we're still good.
All right. Okay. So the big things to look at for lime quality is obviously the total neutralizing value and the fineness of the lime. You can buy coarse lime and eventually it'll become available, but it might be your grandkids that'll take advantage of it. So the fineness of lime is very important. Certain amount passing through 100 mesh it gets gauged by what size mesh it'll go through. On a 1500 mesh screen, greater than 60% passing through 100 mesh will all become available or break down over the first 3 years. So if you have, that's a fairly coarse lime. If you have a finer lime, it'll become available faster, but it'll also won't last quite as long in the soil. Different factors to consider. 20 to 50 mesh, approximately 70% will break down over 3 years. So that's even coarser yet. So know the product. If you're going to buy lime, know the product. Do your research on it before you just go and buy any old product. Relative neutralizing value is one of the factors used in determining a lime's quality. So calcium carbonate obviously 100 is where you want to be at. That's the target. Dolomitic lime is a little wider range. Marl wouldn't be quite as good. Now there's actually some marl up in the Fairview, Grimshaw area it's a good product, but it may not be quite as effective as some limes will be. Gypsum doesn't have a liming value. It's a pH neutral product. Great product for your soils, but not for lime, not to bring the pH up. It will not do that for you. So the efficiency of liming materials depends on the particle size, obviously. So we have, finer to coarser materials, 100 mesh versus it has the quickest effect, dies off slower. Actually, they all kind of die off at the same pace. 20 to 30 mesh takes a long time. You never get the full effect of it for many, many years to follow application. So sieve size, percent passing through a certain sieve size. These are kind of some standards that we go by, where you want to be at. Plowing depth is typically 8 inches, but I'd be happy with 6 inches on that. Let's go through that one. Total neutralizing factor is also an important number on a lime test that you're looking for. I'll just go through some of that. So the payback is fairly prominent when you look at a deficiency rate of nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. We looked at this from a different angle before, but yes, if you have a low pH, you're wasting a whole ton of your fertilizer you're putting out there. So that's the payback. Now it's hard to put that on paper with specific numbers at first, but in the end, you'll definitely see it. And then, of course, some of the crops as their tolerance to acidic soils. Alfalfa is the least tolerant. Legumes would be least tolerant. Blueberries and cranberries love it in acidic soils. On the opposite end of the spectrum. Change in soil. Now, if you want to lower, this is the odd time you want to lower pH. Now, I know there's some soils east of Grand Prairie that are pHs in the 8, maybe 8.5. So if you want to lower pH, you would need sulfur, some form of sulfur to do that. So if you want to go from high of 8.5 down to 6.5, you would require 2,000 to 3,000 pounds of sulfur. That could be elemental sulfur, could be ammonium sulfate. There's different ways of doing it. There are places in Alberta where they use sulfur to lower pH because they have alkaline soils. Most of you guys will not ever have to look at that. So I'll do a quick look at variability on soils. I have a quarter section here that I live on that we farm. I crop share it with another guy at the farmer, a local farmer here. So I did some grid sampling on it, 1 acre grid on it about 4 years ago, just to make a point as to the variability and of course for my own information on this field. So if you look at this here, this is the pH on that field. The high is 7.4 and the low is 5.4, and they're only about 200 meters apart. Now, a 1 acre grid site-specific analysis of your field is gonna break the bank for most of you. So that's not an option unless you're loaded with cash. You don't know what to do with it. But this was more of a trial to catch the differences of variability in the soil, and working with a lab. They helped me on the cost of this to get this figured out. Took us an afternoon, 4 hours of collecting about 2 buckets or 2 coolers full of soil to get this data. Very interesting data. Potassium, again, very high differences from a low of 1.2% to 12. This is excess potassium, obviously, but alfalfa still loves it, performs very well on it. I should go back to this other one here. There used to be a fence line across here. This is a bit of a hillside. That was pasture for years, so the pH is much better. And there was a fence line across here. So this part was pasture, and this was an old haystack yard along here. So that's why you see the differences in numbers, especially potassium. Huge difference in the levels of it. So essentially here, the rest of this is all hayfield, kind of the yellow orange area is all hayfield. So we've been taking out and not putting back in. In a pasture, cattle remove only about 20% of what they consume. The rest stays on the field through manure and urine left behind. So hayfields, you're removing everything that you're producing except for the roots, obviously. Zinc, same idea here. Huge ranges in zinc. Turns out this field doesn't need much zinc at all. I used to put on 2 pounds every 2 pounds per acre every year. At $15 an acre, you do the math, you figure out the variability in your field. You may not need to put on what you're putting down, but you may need to put more of something else. Potassium map, I just showed that one. Okay, I want to show you a comparison here. This is where I circled at the high potassium levels. The next slide is an image of an alfalfa crop growing there. So that circled right there is what you saw here in the high potassium. It's also high phosphate. So alfalfa responds to it extremely well. This is the topography of that field. Now this is exaggerated, but this is based on RTK data, so it's within the centimeter accuracy. High area up here, high area over there was pasture, ridge in the middle. Of course, the low area, this is where the water will generally flow across that field. Another field that's going to quickly show you guys is another Vanderhoof field. This is a nitrogen map. Basically, everything's at the similar level, except for one spot here is a little higher nitrogen. Organic matter in that same field varies quite a lot. We got a spot over here that's interesting. I'll tell you about that. And it shows up in the phosphate. There's an interesting spot there. And when I showed these maps to the grower, he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember what we did. There was a steep hill. We scraped it off, and guess where all the good stuff went? It went in the gully around it. So ended up with a bald spot, and it shows up in the soil optics data quite clearly. Potassium levels doesn't show up there. Potassium tends to be at lower down in soil as well, so it didn't show up on that bald spot. Water holding capacity, again, that shows up. A lot less water holding capacity in that area, less organic matter. This is the topography of that soil, or that field. This is 140 acres or 150 acres of quarter section. Shows you again where the water flows, the directions. It's a bit of a draw going through the middle. This is the nitrogen prescription for that field, the urea prescription. So red means low levels of nitrogen added, green means high. So we're putting a lot of nitrogen in that bald spot, a lot less down the middle, just so you show here the comparison between the two. In the gully, on average, a lot less nitrogen being added because it doesn't need it there. It's got the organic matter. It has nitrogen flows downhill. So the way we do nitrogen prescriptions makes a lot of sense, especially on fields that have some topography to them. And there again, this was the rate of nitrogen on that field for a barley crop. The lowest was 55 pounds in the red areas and up to 156 pounds of urea. So that'll be in that, I guess, 46 times 1.5. So 70 pounds of N at the highest and 50 pounds the lowest. Anyway, a quick aerial shot of blanket nitrogen application. This was biosolids. You can tell the lines where they put more than the rest of the field. Photo taken June 22nd. And a month later, this is what it looked like. So this is the reason why, one of the reasons we need to start looking at variable rate fertility to help you produce better crops. Again, a pea crop, low areas versus or gullies versus ridges, not very pronounced, but still showing a huge difference in production. And this is one farmer's version of variable rate application. Those are probably all fertilizer spreader tracks. And to me, that's variable because you overlap. So in some cases, we're already doing VR without even knowing it, but with the technology we have now, we can do it much better than that. And so that is it for that part of the presentation. Are we out of time, or do we have a few more minutes?
I think we can go right to 11:30 with questions. If people want to ask questions, or if you want to continue on, I'm not sure.
Anything. I've got time for questions. I will bring up a different screen in case we need to show. Let me just. But any questions? Yeah, there will be a good time to address.
I have a question. Just overall, like, where to start? Like, I mean, if you have a 3,000 acre farm and you know that you have low pHs, like in this project, we've seen pHs around 6, and we've seen pHs as low as 4.6. Like, where to start?
That's a good question. So with this field I'm showing you here, here's the pH, and it was almost the whole field is at 5.4 or lower. So that's a big deficit to start with. So I would say, I mean, There's two different approaches. One is to fix your worst places first. The other one is to have your better producing crops perform even better. So sometimes with obviously to fix a field like this is going to take a lot of money. So if you have an area that performs better, you might be better off starting there, bring it up to speed where you want it to be, get your best fields performing at the best possible rate, and then start, diverting some funds into the other areas of the farm. Generally, probably the better approach. Most of us are not. We do not have an unlimited, source of funds we can throw at these fields. So I would start making sure that your best fields are doing as good as possible to make sure you get good ROI on those fields to help you fund fixing some of your other farms.
As far as starting out with your baseline sampling, what is your recommendations for how to start with a baseline sampling?
Baseline sampling, well, I always put it this way. Poor data is worse than no data. So if you're going to soil sample, make sure you do it the right way, or you have somebody do it who has done a million fields before or knows how to collect a proper sample. So it's like you can make a lot of poor decisions even without data, but you can make really detrimental decisions when you have poor data or the wrong data. So start with what in the East they call a bulk sample, in the West we call it a composite. It's a field average. So a field average sample is much better than no sample, and the costs are not high. You're looking at probably less than $1 an acre for a lot of cases to get your average soil analysis of any given field. So start with that. Start with a bulk or composite sample. The next step has often been zones, where we determine different areas of the field based on either yield data or satellite imagery. Now you take a field like this and you split it into 3 or 4 zones or 5 zones, and that's better. You're hitting some areas better than others than you would with a bulk sample. Grid sampling, site-specific sampling, what I showed you in my place, is better than zones because now you're hitting more detail. But there's digital programs out there now that give you incredible detail on variability. That's kind of on the high end, the Cadillac side of things. So start with a bulk or composite sample. At least know where your average is at. Most of us farm on the averages. We can do all kinds of fancy data, but if you don't have the equipment to deal with it, or you don't have the means or the knowledge to deal with it, you're just collecting a bunch of numbers that cost you money and you may not use. So when you start off, I think a composite sample is a good way to go.
Awesome, thank you. So it looks like in the comments here we have, how can high aluminum be corrected?
High aluminum, I've touched briefly on that in the presentation. There's a couple of ways. You can do a very immediate correction by placing, let's say, using a granular gypsum and seed placing about 25 pounds in with your seed. What that does is it creates a band right around the seed that will have a lot less aluminum issues. And the other thing that will do is, if you happen to have some phosphate in that soil that's tied up with aluminum, which often is the case, when you have high aluminum, you'll have phosphate tied up. So when you put that gypsum down in the seed band, it'll actually release that phosphate to the crop. So there's potential bonus there. The other way is, of course, liming. When you lime your field and you bring your pH calcium to where it needs to be, aluminum becomes much less of a factor, because aluminum is most toxic and most active in the soil in pHs around 5.5 and lower. So liming or gypsum can both achieve it. Liming would achieve it long term. Gypsum would be a yearly thing. You always put it in your band. And in most cases, in your soils, 25 to 50 pounds of gypsum in your seed row is an excellent way to go.
Okay. The next question is from Andreas. Your goal for the pH level is always 7, not make a. I don't really understand this question. Andreas, do you want to ask the question directly? That's okay. We can move on then. So Jed Franklin asked, what is the cost per acre of lime?
Okay, well, that depends a lot on, obviously, on how much lime you need. But for example, typically hauling lime out of, actually, I think the stuff coming out of Southern Alberta and the stuff coming out of Chetwynd, you're looking at roughly What did the guy tell me? I talked to him just the other day. 100 and around 100 and no, it's close to $200 per ton in your field. So if you need 2 ton to the acre, that would be $400 an acre. If you need 8 ton, that's a large expense. But over the course of the years, that will pay back. So typically you can get lime in your field between $150 and $200 a ton.
And that would
And
be just the cost of product and then the spreading on top of it?
depends. This one company will spread it for you, and I think he said
Okay.
around just under $200 a ton. They would have it spread on your field.
Oh, okay. Fred, you have your hand up.
Yeah, going back to the gypsum, what kind of a product are we talking about there? Because I know that there's gypsum available in a sulfur product, but like if I'm not trying to, I don't need that sulfur. What other options are there for gypsum?
All gypsums are calcium sulfate, so they all have that sulfur in them. The only other option would be then to use lime. And you could also, there's some granular pelletized limes out there. You could also place some of that through your air drill and have a similar effect, but just gypsum is more effective. And when you say you don't need the sulfur, I'm assuming you get your sulfur source from somewhere else. Is that correct?
Yeah, typically I'm, well, kind of my go-to in the last few years has been S15,
Right.
and my sulfur's actually building. And so back to the lime, like if I were using the what is it, the 98
98G.
98G, how many pounds of that would I put in?
I would do about the same, 20 to 30 pounds probably. But the challenge you're going to have with that is it's a fairly dusty product. And if you happen to be planting on a day where the humidity is a bit higher, quite likely you're going to have plugged runs. And so, whereas the gypsum is the synthetic gypsum. I'm not talking the naturally mined gypsum because that's super dusty as well. The stuff coming out of Lafarge and Kamloops, that's a good product, but it's just too dusty to put through your air seeder. So the synthetic gypsum, which would be, let's say, I know there's suppliers in Dawson Creek that have it. It's the sulfur R plus. It comes out of Eastern Kentucky. It's a very tightly held granule, so that works well. Now I know if you're not needing the sulfur, I mean you can't do. You're not going to damage your crop by putting more sulfur down, but you're paying for the sulfur. So I understand why, I do understand why you would not want to put it down, but there really is very limited options on what you can do. Gypsum always is a calcium sulfate. The only option would be to use a different, go away from the S15, but that's a good product as well. So I definitely understand what you're getting at.
Thank you.
So Andreas put in the comments here, and I think what he's asking is your goal always to reach a pH of 7, or does it make a difference on your soil class or your soil type, whether like clay or sandy soils, on what your target pH should be?
The target pH would be determined not by soil type, but maybe by crop you're growing. If you're growing alfalfa, then you need to target that 6.5 to 6.8, maybe 7 pH. But if you're growing barley, peas, wheat, if you target a pH of 6, you'll see a big response as well. Now 7 is still ideal, or 6.8 is still ideal, but it may not be within reach from an economical perspective. But the different soil types, whether they're coarse, sandier soil, or a sandy loam, or just a solid clay, the difference is the amount of lime it takes to move the needle on the pH. So in a coarser soil, you need less lime to move it from, let's say, 6 to 7 than you would in a high clay content, very fine soil. You'll need 2 or 3 times the amount of lime to move the needle the same distance.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, hello. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Richard.
And you said that there are some contractors that are willing or able to spread the lime. Do you know where they are and what their name is?
Yes, what I can do is I can share the names with Kaylee and Jennifer later, and they can get them to you. I think would that work for you guys?
Yes, that would be good.
Yep, we can do that.
Okay, I'll do that after this. We're done here. I'll email you some contact information.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Sahel, you have some questions.
Hello, thank you so much for this great presentation. I have one question. I would be appreciative if you could answer this. I want to know what type of the microbe we can use it for amending of the soil pH, actually for the acidic pH. I just want to know how much it can be effective for changing the pH for using the microbe.
Using a micro, you said?
Yes, for example, some of the bacteria or everything.
Oh, I
I'm
see. The
talking about
microbes.
the biological fertilizer.
Mhm.
So because before that I worked with in the alkaline or basic soils, I use a Theobacillus or something like that. It was very effective, but I was wondering if I could do it in the acidic soil and how much this project can be successful for now.
Mhm. Okay, that's an interesting question because there's a lot of companies out there, and just to lay it out bluntly, there's a lot of companies out there selling you the magic pill that's supposed to fix all your problems and maybe even get you to heaven, that kind of thing. So I'm always very careful. The bottom line is you need calcium, like volume of calcium, to move your pH in the soil. There is no magical fix. Now there's some microbial activities, some products that will increase the microbial activity and can work towards making these nutrients more available. For example, you could introduce something in your soil that will increase the availability of calcium, which your plant needs for proper growth. So I'm not saying there couldn't be a positive impact to using some of these types of products, but the challenge always is long term. What you're doing is you're increasing the rate of removal from your soil. And as far as I know, and there's some folks on this call that I'm not going to say any names, Jason, but that might have a better have some better input on that as well. But the bottom line is you need physical calcium carbonate to move your pH up. And now there's a product that came through my neck of the woods years ago now that was supposed to fix your liming issues, and it was a product that had great promise, and they were using a magical amount of like a half a kilogram per acre. And when you already have 2,000 to 4,000 pounds of calcium in your soil, it didn't make any sense. And I told the guy to start with, I don't think it's going to work, but I sat in and listened. I watched a few of my clients take their best fields over the course of 3 years and convert them to their worst fields by using a product like that, because they believe the promise. So I'm very, very wary of these types of products that are not necessarily based on science to do what you'd like them to do. So all I can say is I am not aware of a product that can replace the use of physical lime or calcium carbonate. But technology is advancing. Maybe at some point we will have something that can do that. I know there's products that can make lime more available to your crop, which is great. But if your cupboards are half empty, you still have to fill the cupboards at some point, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that helps you at all, but that's my take on it. And I don't know everything. There's a lot of things I'm sure I'm missing, but my understanding is that we need actual physical lime to make that change beneficial long term.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So 2 questions here are, to measure pH, do you need to send it away to the lab, or is a soil pH meter enough?
I'm not very familiar with the soil pH meters. I know they get used a fair bit for quick in-field readings. I don't know the principle they work around or work on. I would be hesitant to make liming decisions. Actually, I would strongly advise not to make liming decisions based on a pH meter or a pH test kit. I know you can use like a hot tub pH test kit to get a rough idea, but not to make an informed decision, because you're looking at spending hundreds of dollars per acre to correct an issue, and you do not want to do that on questionable or poor data.
Thank you.
And excuse
Go ahead, Sahel.
Excuse me, I would like to get back to the pH. I have a different result of laboratory for the pH because, for example, in one of our site, the pH was in the summertime was acidic, but in the winter time, we got we got this test and. For the another laboratory and with a different pH and for example was 70.2 or 6.8, but before that for in summer 4.9. And the treatment was just using the cover cropping. I don't know that this is we can trust to the result or may because in the winter I know. Could you please explain about if you have any idea about that?
Well, if I heard you correctly, is you had different results or different pH results from different labs, correct?
Yes, but in
Okay.
a different field, but this in the same, I mean that in the same location.
Right, right. And so different labs use different pH tests, so they will come up with some different numbers. I don't know specifically. I can get information for you. I'm not the lab coat, so I'm not extremely well versed in the different methods of pulling a pH test. I know that when I switched from Element Labs, which is located in Edmonton, to A&L Labs, the pH dropped by about 0.5 point because of a different method of testing for pH. So there can be variability there. And like we covered in the presentation, pH can also change quite a lot from spring to summer or spring to fall, or so there's a variability there as well.
And the best time for getting the pH, because I know that it will be variable in each day and sometimes in the winter or not. But I wanted to have the best data for the pH, and after that we are going, for example, adding or applying a fertilizer or something like that. You recommended in the spring or fall?
I almost always do it in this fall, but the most important part is that when you test, if you ever retest, you do it at the same time you did it last time. So if you sample this, if you test in the spring this year, then next year you should test in the spring again. So just make sure you do it at the same time of the year because it will fluctuate.
Thank you. Question here from Jason is, can you talk about molybdenum? Sorry, I'm going to butcher that, but and its requirements for the Peace Region soils.
I did some soils this year that I tested for molybdenum all over central and northern BC, and for the most part we are on the lower side. Now the problem with the soil or the lab testing molybdenum is the fact that we don't have it. You need it in very, very minute amounts, and the lab only tests to 1/10 of a parts per million. And I think, if we could move that decimal point over a couple of places, we'd have a much better test. So it's really hard to get a good reading. I know we're generally low in molybdenum. Molybdenum is very important. Now, there's some companies who come up with some seed treatment or foliar products that have just a small amount of moly, for lack of a better term, in them, because we need very, very tiny amounts of it. Now, I don't know if that is what Jason was referring to, but mostly we are low on molybdenum. But to add it is, we've had challenges finding companies that provide a good source, and we're talking milligrams per acre that are needed, like just very small amounts.
Thank you. Richard has a question. Have you heard of various technologies for measuring pH values throughout the field? What is your opinion?
Yes, I have. I've actually, there's quite a few companies doing various technology. What it is, it measures pH and electrical conductivity in the soil. So you get two pieces of data out of it, and they drag it across your field to collect the data. My opinion of it is, now I don't know a whole lot of it, or I don't know the details necessarily, but I know when let's say you're testing a field with your Varus technology, and then it rains in the middle of the field or middle of a time, you get a different number after the rain than you do before the rain. So that is a red flag. And the other thing is you're basing it is one way to to get the variability in your soil, but it still doesn't tell you why your pH is lower and higher in certain areas. So I'm cautious, like I said in the presentation, I'm cautious to make expensive decisions based on pH because it's not a reliable source of information, because it does not give you the buffer pH. It gives you pH and electrical conductivity. Now you can create maps from that. I understand that, and a lot of guys do it, and it's a pretty good way to go. I'm a bit skeptical about the effectiveness of it and missing certain parts of your field where you may not get the right data.
So Jason also commented here that soil tests are showing that we are low. I'm assuming this is molybdenum, Jason, and not available to when the pH is low. So going back to his original question.
Right. Yes, I see. Okay. Did I have on my slide, did that famous slide show anything about the effective pH on moly? I'm just going to quickly find that slide here. I don't know if moly was on that list. Take me a second to find it. Here we go. Here, I'll just share this that screenshot. And yes, it has moly on it. You guys see it there?
Yep.
So moly is available at higher pHs. You get below 6.5, even you start seeing less availability, and really low when you get the 5.5 pH. So it is something that probably should be addressed, especially in alfalfa crops or peas where you are looking at nodulation. Moly plays an important role in plants actually being able to produce their own nitrogen, like peas and alfalfa. So I would say look for a product that you can coat your seed with, or do a foliar in-season application, spoon feeding it based on that.
Thank you. Any additional questions? I have one last question. With the price of land going up, there's a lot of producers that are clearing wooded areas or clearing land versus purchasing land. And what kind of guidance would you offer as far as, because that's kind of starting at the life cycle beginning of annual cropping land from cleared land, and what kind of guidance would you offer as far as management?
When you're clearing land, mostly, I mean, it depends what's on the land to begin with. If you have a pine type of pine tree type of a stand, you're going to start with a fairly acidic soil, most likely. If you have more of an aspen type grove, you'll have or willows, you'll tend to have better soil conditions. I guess simply knowing the fact that it's going to cost you about 10 times more per acre to rebuild a soil than to maintain it would be an indication that we need to start focusing on maintaining what we have, or at the very least start focusing on maintaining what we have so it doesn't get any worse. Whether that means applying 200 pounds of a pelletized lime or 100 pounds a year, or whatever your crop moves, just to keep where we are. And there's good options for that. So my approach is, let's maintain what we have and then slowly start building towards better. And that would apply to existing cleared land or newly freshly cleared land. You're just going to start working with a different type. Now, if you're taking all the trees off of your, let's say you're clearing land, you're taking all the trees off and burning them in piles, well, there goes most of your calcium and potassium. So when you apply wood ash to your land, you're applying calcium, potassium mostly. So again, if you have a way to keep that ash on your land and spread it, that's better than just burning it and leaving it in piles. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any additional questions? We are over time, but this is great conversation. So, but any questions additional? No, well then I would just like to thank you for your time, Norm. It was really beneficial having you here, and I learned a lot, and I'm sure that everybody else did. And if people do have additional questions, they can send me an email, and I'll get in contact with Norm for additional questions, and we'll be sure to send out the list of contractors that sell lime or spread lime that Norm has.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you again, Norm.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us. And also, we have our Love of Ag Winter Seminar at the Tower Lake Hall on February 14th. So if you would like to attend our in-person event, please send me an email at hello@bcgrain.com to hold your spot. And hopefully we'll see you all there next week.